chocolate covered Twinkies. Promise. God's gift to the world. Well, right next to beautiful mixed women. What are we talking about today? Wait a minute. What is this? What is this? Problem glasses? Nose ring? It's pretty attractive. Wait, hold on. So, I mean, a pretty attractive young lady is speaking with authority about a topic she barely researched as if she knows everything about it. What is this? What is this? Is this 2014 Bass FCZ? I thought we were past all this. So joking aside, someone asked me what my opinion was on the whole Rage After Shitstorm thing that occurred. And I'm not entirely sure if the person wanted my opinion on her video that caused what happened, or my thoughts on people's reaction to her video. So I figured I would just respond to her video itself first, and then I'll chat about people's response to her video, I don't know, sometime next week or in the next video. Yeah. Two birds with two stones, I guess. Or is it the same bird with one stone? I don't know. Take us away.
Racism, it's an interesting lexeme. I remember being first taught about it when I was a wee little kid, and we were talking about the slave trade, you know, in Africa and all that other shit.
Africa? Is that actually a place? Never been to this Africa before. I'm just messing with you. Go on, continue.
So at the time, I only saw racism as a thing that white people did to black people.
Well, that's wrong. Now, I understand why you would think that. I mean, if you've only been taught that or raised to look at the world, or you've only been taught that one aspect of racism constantly, I could see why as a child you only see it that way. However, racism is pretty simple enough. It just means you think one race is superior than the other. It kind of begins and ends with that, honestly. All the other bullcrap is, well, just that, bullcrap.
Despite the fact that I as a kid was racially profiled for being German, for example, I got called a Nazi on the playground, etc., I never actually assumed that that was a case of racism. I just thought, heck, that's just people being assholes, right?
Well, you were correct. That's exactly what it was. They weren't saying that you were inferior because you're German. They weren't saying you were better because you were German. They're just being a jerk, trying to make you feel bad about some shit you had nothing to do with. It's called being an asshole. Not racist.
Which leads me to think, despite having known what racism was, I still wasn't able to put A and B together.
Yes, because you were a child. I don't really expect children to have fully fleshed out, cognitive systems. It's kind of something you gotta figure out over time. So, I'm not really surprised that that's how that happened.
Which then gives me another question to whether or not the term racism actually properly exists.
Well, the word exists. I mean, you just used it. So if I wanted to be a right dick, I could say, well, there you go. You've answered your own question. Does racism exist? Well, I just said the word. If you mean, do people actually believe that one race is superior than the other? Well, some people do. It's actually pretty few and far between, honestly, if you really think about it. But yeah, there are some people who are truly and genuinely racist. You won't meet very many of them, but I mean, they're a thing.
Racism is a made-up word. Well, heck, every word is a made-up word. We use words to explain new things that we describe to often make our lives a heck of a lot easier. And then we use those words to accuse people of things to help our own selfish narrative of getting our point across.
Well, I think I've stumbled upon one of the first problems with your video. We can use words to do that, but that's not its function. I mean, it's like a hammer. I mean, you can use a hammer to smash someone's skull in. You can use a hammer to open up a jar of mayonnaise if you wanted to. Well, if the jar of mayonnaise was made out of glass, I guess, a pickle jar, you could do that. But that's not the hammer's function. That's not what the hammer was created to do. So, yes, you can use words like racism to hurt other people's feelings or to try to get your point across or to shut down conversations, but that's not what the word is for, and that's not what the word originally describes. It is actually the connotation of the word racism or the negative implications of the word racism that gives it its power. However, as a term itself, language, like any other tool, can be used for good or bad. So the term itself is, when applied correctly, is just that. It's a word that describes a phenomenon. And do some people use it incorrectly? Yeah, all the time, but That doesn't make the word wrong, and it doesn't mean that the concept doesn't exist.
So, like, what did Milo say that was violent in a rape threat?
It is violent.
What did
He says the rhetoric, racist, sexist bullshit, that is violent. Racist, sexist.
The same goes with transphobia, Islamophobia, and many other words that are used for fear-mongering. And words like these all lie under the same hood. They are used to force people to ignore why we might feel uneasy about people that look or are a little bit different.
No. Ironically, those words actually kind of specifically explain exactly why you would feel uneasy about people who look different from you. If you say that someone is transphobic, they're worried about someone that looks different from you because they're trans. That is a complete and accurate description of the problem that they are perceiving you to have. No, I mean, they're probably wrong. I mean, because I don't know very many people who actually are afraid of trans people or hate them, but those terms quite literally exist to describe why people feel uneasy about someone that looks different from them. Like, that is literally their function. I don't know what you're talking about here.
And notice how these words were mostly created by minorities or people who felt oppressed. These words gave people power that would inevitably cause other people a retraction of rights. For example, when we speak of racism, the overuse of the word has allowed affirmative action to be implemented in our society.
Hey, well, no. The reason why affirmative action is a thing is because there's a majority of a specific type of people, in America, white people, and there's a minority of other types of white people, Mexicans or Hispanic people, and black people and Asian people. Affirmative action's intentions, although I completely disagree with it, is to try to find some balance, or at least try to give some type of fair shake to people who are in a minority, to give them jobs that they otherwise wouldn't get because they assume that a business might be racist. Now, I'm personally not a fan of affirmative action. I don't like affirmative action simply because sometimes it can put people who aren't qualified into positions simply because they fit a certain description, and I don't think that's healthy for any organization ever. So I don't like affirmative action, to be clear. However, affirmative action isn't a thing because someone said racism. It's a thing because there's a minority of individuals in a certain place. Black people, Asians, Mexicans. Yeah, that's why. I don't like it, but that's why it's a thing.
Or when we use the word sexism, the use of that word has allowed women to gain more custody rights.
Well, no, that's just not how that works. The reason why women were able to obtain more custody rights was because it's assumed that as the individual who has to carry their child for 9 months, that they, probably more than anyone else, would have a much more invested interest in the child's well-being. Now, I don't think that this is entirely accurate, not only because some women think it's their right to kill their own child, but I'll save that for another video, but also because it makes the assumption that men would not have an active or not have the same amount of invested interest in their own child. So I guess that could be seen as sexism. However, it's not the word sexism that made it so that women are able to obtain custody rights easier than men. It's the assumption that women, more than anybody else in the world, the mother would have a much more invested interest in their child than anyone. That's the assumption. Wrong, right? I mean, we can argue that, but that's what the issue there is.
Let us delve into the crime rate of America. About 13% of Americans are black, according to the estimates from the US Census Bureau. And yes, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, black offenders committed 52% of homicides. This was in data recorded between 1980 and 2008. Only 45% of the offenders were white. In 2013, the FBI reported that 38% of murders were committed by blacks. However, only 31.1% were committed by whites. In 29.1% of cases, the perpetrator's race was unknown. Over 3 years of data from 2011 to 2013, 38.5% of people arrested for murder, robbery, manslaughter, rape, and aggravated assault were black. This is evidence from official police reports that blacks are more likely to commit crimes than whites.
Well, I understand why you would believe that to be the case, because if you look at the raw data, you see that more often than not, it is black people who are committing these crimes than white people. I mean, sure. There's a bit of a problem with that. And that problem with that is the statistics don't address the actual amount of black people who are committing these crimes. See, because if only a small fraction of black people are committing these crimes, then that means, despite the fact that they may be the majority of the perpetrators of the crimes in general, it actually would not be an accurate reflection of the behavior of black people. In fact, the criminal in general is not an accurate reflection of people's current behavior in general. Unless you want to assume jaywalking, then that would be pretty accurate. I'm just saying. So, actually, one thing that I thought was interesting was I actually wanted to know how many black people relative to the population in America were actually committing all these crimes. And I couldn't actually find any statistic with raw data. So what I had to do was I kind of had to be a little creative and just be really, really liberal with the data that I obtained. And I actually got some of this data from Wikipedia, so it's probably not really accurate. But this is what I did. So, okay, so just bear with me for a second. So what I did was I went to Google, which led me to Wikipedia, and I found this juicy bit of information. So this was going to be my basis when I try to figure out the actual amount, which actually wouldn't be the actual amount, but a really liberal amount or percentage of black people incarcerated or committing these crimes. All right, so approximately 12 to 13% of the American population is African American. In some statistics, it's 14%. So, yeah. But they make up 35% of all jail inmates and 37% of all prison inmates of the 2.2 million male inmates of 2014. And this is from the U.S. Department of Justice in 2014. So let's combine 35% of 2.5 million plus 37% of 2.2 million. So just give me a sec to do that math. So after doing all of that math, I found out that 72% of black people who are in jail or in prison, since I combined the two percentages together, would give you about 1,584,000 black people in jail, or black men, since the statistic only really showed us African American males. So how many black people are actually in America? Well, let's go ahead and look that up. So then I went to blackdemographics.com, which I'm not sure if this is accurate, but we're just going to have to trust it for now, since this is all more of a thought experiment more so than it is hard raw data. But the population of black people back in 2015, which could have dramatically changed in the last 2 years, which again, we have to be liberal here, was 46.3 million. That's rounding up. It was actually 46,282,800 African Americans in that study. So let's just be I don't know. It will be even more liberal. Let's just slice that in half to get the male population of African Americans. We just divide by 2. And that's 23,141,040. Okay, alright, okay. So now what we have to do is we're going to divide the amount of black men who are incarcerated back in 2014 with the approximate population of black men in general in America. And let's see what percentage that is. So after doing all of that, I ended up dividing, I'm just going to round, 1.5 million into 23 million to find that that is about 0.06%. So that would mean, using our very liberally contrived data, that about approximately, give or take, 0.06% of the population of black men committing crimes is, well, just that, 0.06%. So that would mean that 94% of the black male population is not committing crimes, again, based off of our liberal data. Now, this does not invalidate the raw fact that most of the incarcerations are black men, and this doesn't invalidate the fact that most of the crimes or murder that is reported are done by black men. It doesn't. In fact, what I have liberally created necessitates that this stuff is true to even come approximately to these conclusions. However, what this does mean is that you cannot use this small population of black men to infer large-scale generalities of the majority of black people, because it's a small fraction of society. And what's interesting even more is that criminality in general is actually a really, really small population of society, just in general. So I actually haven't really proven anything that most people don't already know. Like I said, and to be totally clear here, this does not invalidate what she said. It's not a counter argument to, it's actually not even an argument, it's a raw statistical fact. But what is really important here is to understand probably one of the biggest issues of racism, and that is the fact that you are trying to judge wholesale groups based on the minority rather than the majority. Because if you looked at the majority, which is just basic common sense, by the way, the vast majority of black people are not committing crimes. Unless piracy. Well, okay, well then, I think everybody would be committing piracy, so.
And why is this? Is it the unfair justice system?
I mean, it could be. It's worth discussing, although I think that could be part of it. I mean, there's also social economic factors as well. Maybe some of these people are just crazy and insane. It might have something to do with mental illness. I mean, we won't know unless we dissect these individual cases as to why these people committed the crimes that they committed. And what was the reasoning behind them? I mean, having raw data that they've done it does not tell us why, the reasons for it, and or anything other than it happened, for that matter.
You guys like to say that, but it's not. In the book of IQ and the Wealth of Nations, it talks about the IQ of the average sub-Saharan African being at 80. The IQ of an African American is normally at 85. White populations in Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Europe, South Africa, and the United States score really close to one another, being at around 100.
While reviewing this video, I came to realize something about this specific section of the video, and that is simply saying IQ scores doesn't really mean much to anybody, because you wouldn't really understand where you would stack relative to other people if you're just given a number. You actually have to know a little bit about what the IQ scale is. So to look it up, to give you guys an idea of what I'm here, Louis Tiemann, the man who developed the original notion of IQ, proposed this scale for classifying IQ. So if you have an IQ over 140, that's genius or near genius. I mean, I would imagine 155, 160, genius level. 120 to 140, that's very superior intelligence. 110 to 119, that's just superior. 90 to 109 is normal or average. 80 to 89 is dullness. And 70 to 79 is borderline deficiency. And under 70 is definite feeble-mindedness. So to give you guys an idea of what IQ really means, because it wouldn't mean much if you've never actually studied the topic. Continue.
The reason to why IQ is such an important factor is because a lower IQ causes many detrimental factors in society. These include poverty, dropping out of school, unemployment, divorce and lower rates of marriage, welfare dependency, a child's poor motor skills and development, and criminal behavior. So then, setting out these societal differences, which is backed by data, surely should be common sense, right?
Now, all this stuff might be very well true, but you'll notice the problem in just a second. I'm pretty sure most people have actually already picked up on the problem, but in case you didn't, she'll show you.
Think again, we are still expected to act as if these IQ differences do not exist at all, thus assuming that these societal problems occurring are not a genetic factor, but are blamed on white people as per usual.
The biggest problem here, which I'm sure you guys have figured out by now, is that these IQ tests don't explain the results. They just show you what is. So I can't argue with what is, because I don't have the data in front of me, and I don't even know how accurate it is, to be completely honest, but I'll assume it's accurate. It doesn't explain why, which means in order to come to the conclusion that it's purely genetic, or maybe I'm the one inferring that she thinks it's purely genetic because she didn't imply anything else, in order to come to the conclusion that it's just genetic is something that you just have to come up with arbitrarily because you want to. I mean, there might be a consistent trend between, people who are dark, but one thing I found interesting was that Nigerians actually score even a higher, score higher in IQ tests than Asians, and Asians are like universally agreed upon to be the smartest of the races, so that's pretty interesting factoid unto itself, but I don't even know how accurate that is. That said, to come to the conclusion that it is genetic is something that you just can't do based on the data. You just can't. There's might be a correlation, but doesn't equal causation.
And if we highlight these slight differences, we are called racist and assholes.
Well, because if you actually stop and analyze what you've said or what you've implied, and let's take stock, shall we? You've noticed how in your video you've only framed this between white and black people. So okay. based on that context, you are implying that white people are intellectually superior than black people based on the raw numbers in general. That is the purest form of racism.
However, it is a fact that wherever black people are concentrated in large numbers in the West, they are likely to promote tribal situations.
Woman, that's what human beings do since the dawning of time. That's not even a remarkable statement to make. Have you ever been to a high school? That's just things that people do. Where do you think we get the word tribe from? What do you think that describes? I mean, tribes all over the world for thousands of years. It's not a black person thing, that's a human thing. Come on.
Such as gangs, territories, and fights. But for some reason, it is still our fault as white people.
Serious question, but I've noticed this theme in your video when you're constantly trying to put this battle here. That it's a dichotomy between it's just black people genetically and it's the fault of white people. I don't think that this is the correct dichotomy to frame this issue in. One, because I don't know enough people who truly and genuinely believe that every single problem ever is the cause of white people. I mean, there are some, but is it a vast belief beyond all black people? I mean, who's to say? I really don't think it is, you know, considering I've spent most of my time with African Americans. That said, I don't see how you can then purely reduce it to simply because they're black, or imply that it's purely genetic, that genetic has a gigantic factoid into it.
On average, densely populated black communities show a thirst for tribal mentality.
Densely populated areas of human beings show a thirst of tribal mentality. That's not a remarkable statement. It's common sense, actually.
As well as tribal warfare. Because it is still white people to blame for a problem that is predominantly genetic.
You're not saying anything remarkable. What's remarkable, actually, is the fact that you think that this is a point that helps increase your argument here. That a basic factoid that exists of all humanity somehow shows that black people's lower IQ makes them more tribalistic. But really, that's something that even intelligent people do as well. Ever heard of a fucking high school debate club? Notice how they only hang out with, you know, their friends?
Whites have given many resources to help black communities in the West and even in Africa. However, black communities on average remain unsuccessful in full integrations in civilized communities. It might also be surprising that blacks have a higher self-esteem than whites on average.
That is not surprising in the least bit. At least not to me.
In one large study of 11 to 16-year-olds, blacks rated themselves as more attractive than did whites. Blacks also rated themselves higher in reading, social studies, and sciences, but funnily enough, not in mathematics. This inferiority complex leads to the whole "we was kings and shit" debacle.
Now, again, I don't know if you cut something out in between these jump cuts, or if you're just really bad at transitioning, but the previous point you made does not support the conclusion that you have. If black people have a higher self-esteem than white people, how could you come to the conclusion that they then have an inferiority complex? I mean, you could be implying that these people all lied in this study and they said that they had a higher self-esteem than they actually did, but you could only be implying that to people that have some understanding of narcissism. Only people who have an understanding of narcissism would understand that implication. To most other people, these 2 points do not flow together at all. I don't get the point here. I mean, if you want to say that black people have an inferiority complex to white people, or some black people do, or whatever, I mean, sure, fine, make that argument. But you can't lead the argument with black people have a higher sense of self-esteem.
A lot of black people like to assume that they were Egyptian kings, which is funny because it doesn't help the whole slave thing. But nonetheless, they really weren't kings.
Well, no shit, they weren't fucking kings. They're just some nigga that works, I don't know, 7-Eleven. But I mean, was some black person a king somewhere in Africa? Yeah. Yes. That happened. So, it's actually not a remarkable thing at all, because any race of people anywhere could claim that they was kings. Well, Natives, Americans would have to claim they were chiefs, to be historically accurate.
Near to every single African slave that was brought from Africa to America came from mainly two countries in Africa, Senegambia and Angola. Both of these countries are on the west coast of Africa, and neither of these countries are anywhere near to Egypt. Mitochondrial DNA proves this.
Oh, I'm not gonna argue with that. I mean, that might be well true and everything, but I mean, these people still aren't wrong. I mean, perhaps their bloodline was never attached to that of a king, but there's a black king in Africa somewhere.
Not to mention, a lot of African languages prove that black people lack abstract thinking.
You know, if you stop and realize that a language in and of itself is an abstract concept, and the mere fact that you're even able to speak a language means that you can think abstractly, you'd come to realize how insanely stupid that statement was. It was remarkably dumb. And you said the shit with all of the authority and smugness in the fucking world. That's amazing. Golly gee.
As I would like to mention, not all black people lack it. As I said, this is just an average.
Yeah, your qualifying statement makes no sense. Like, in order to be a human, you have to think abstractly. That's just basic. And if you tell me that these people have a language, it means that they can think abstractly. Because language is an abstract concept, dumbass.
The English to Zulu language dictionary has only 250 pages. And like the other African Negro languages, it does not include a working definition of any abstract concepts. Because technically, it's not possible for them to think that way or those communities to have been thinking that way.
That's hilarious. No, seriously, I mean, you say that's just all the smugness and sincerity in the world. You actually think that, on average, black people can't think abstractly. Well, this is something that's pretty simple to prove your point incorrectly. But if any of these people in sub-Saharan Africa were hunters, then that would mean that they understood the concept of distance. They might not have a word for it, but they have to be able to understand it. I mean, how else could they throw a spear or shoot an arrow if they didn't understand abstractly that one thing is there and I am here? You may not be able to say the word distance, but they have to understand it in some concept, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to hunt. That's just something you need to be able to do in order to fucking be. And I didn't even need a scientific study to prove that nonsense incorrectly. You literally just need common sense. Come on.
Obviously, you can then argue why a lot of African Americans are then able to learn English.
What the fuck? Do you know why African Americans are able to learn English? Because that's the fucking language that they were taught when they were children. Okay, I'll be more fair. It's because as a child, your brain is a sponge and absorbs any amount of information that comes into it. English is a language that's constantly being input into their young minds. That's how they learn English. They learn how to associate different words with different concepts, mostly because their parents teach them and because kids are actually a lot more attentive than you might believe. African Americans are able to learn English because they're people and they...
However, do you remember when I said that the average African American IQ is 15 points higher than that of the sub-Saharan Africans? That could be a reason why.
Yes, but that would still be stupidity and borderline mental retardation,
So again, whenever I'm talking about this, it's really important to remember that I am talking about an average. Anyway, that's enough from me. I'm going to be going back to what I can do best, and that is being literally Hitler. And as always, keep memeing and dreaming.
Well, that's the end of the first video, and subsequently the end of mine. I guess the last thing I have to say is this. I don't know why she framed this video in a sense of white people battling against black people. It's really clear to me that people really want there to be a racial problem in America. I mean, so far as you'll come up with this nonsense here that black people can't think abstractly on average. That's remarkable. I mean, like, you've really got to be reaching if you want to, try to create some kind of strife between white and black people. And that's what, I mean, and the thing that really kind of gets me the most about this topic or these talks about IQ between black and white people. Not only, again, is it normally framed just between black and white people, again, evidence in her video. Not that being said, it's not like no one ever has talked about different IQs between different races. It's just again, it's normally black versus white. The thing that gets me, though, is the fact that, well, for starters, I'm an individualist first and foremost, so I will assume all this stuff is true, okay? It's fine, it's true. Black people have an IQ of 80 or 85 or whatever. Well, what fucking difference does it make to the individual? What if the individual has an IQ of 110? You're going to treat him like you treat the person with an IQ of 85? That wouldn't be right. That wouldn't be reasonable, because he doesn't have an IQ of 85. So why would you treat him in such a manner? You won't, most of the time, you wouldn't even know an individual person's IQ unless they tested it out for themselves, or, I don't know, you made them do a secret test in secret and recorded the results. So how would you even be able to walk around with the mindset that these people are inferior to you if you've never talked to them or interacted with them from the beginning? And see, my friends, this is the gigantic and biggest problem of racism. You're treating people badly, or you're treating people wrongly based on stuff that might not even actually apply to them. Yeah, it might be true that more black people are committing crimes than white people, but it's still only a small amount of black people committing these crimes. So it's not reasonable to treat every single black male or black people like they're criminals, like they're going to do something bad. I mean, so that's that. So in the next video, which will be a lot shorter than this, I'll talk about people's opinions about the video itself, which might be interesting, or not. We won't know until we make it. So that being said, man, I certainly hope you guys enjoyed today's video, and if you did, man, go ahead and click the like button. And shoot, go ahead and click that subscribe button. Comment in the comment box below, and as always, you guys have yourselves a great day, and I'll see you cool cats soon. Adios.